In the mist-shrouded port of Blackwater Bay, where salt-worn ships deliver whispers of distant wars and forgotten kingdoms, lives a foreign widow whose scarred hands craft the most exquisite timepieces on the eastern seaboard. Scenic has spent 3 years building her modest watchmaker's shop and a quiet existence, but beneath her melodic accent and reserved demeanor lies a past forged in royal blood and sovereign protection. The delicate tools she wields to bring clockwork to life once delivered death with surgical precision, as the infamous Nightingale, the most lethal personal guardian in the Indari Queen's Royal Security Division. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon rain taps a gentle rhythm against the beveled glass windows of Catri Chronometrier, the small watchmaker's shop nestled between a bookbinder and a spice merchant on Blackwater Bay's historic Merchant Street. Inside, amber lamplight creates pools of warmth across polished oak counters, where Scenic works with characteristic precision. Her slender fingers, marked with the nearly invisible scars of a lifetime of discipline, manipulate a minute. Gear beneath a jeweler's loop with breath-held steadiness. At 43, Celine carries herself with a quiet dignity that the townspeople attribute to her exotic foreign upbringing. Her midnight black hair, swept into an immaculate chignon with a single dramatic streak of silver at the temple, frames high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that notice everything, while appearing focused only on the delicate mechanisms before her. The shop itself is a study in deliberate organization, every tool in exact alignment, each timepiece displayed with mathematical precision, the entire space arranged to allow unobstructed views of all approaches and exits. A casual observer would note only an exceptionally meticulous watchmaker, but someone with tactical training might recognize the careful positioning that allows Celine to reach any point in the shop within 3 steps, or how the seemingly decorative brass stand, holding her magnification tools, could serve as an effective impact weapon if grasped by its reinforced base. The bell above the door announces a customer with a gentle chime designed to sound harmonious, but penetrating enough to be heard from the back workshop. Celine's eyes flick toward the ornate Victorian clock on the far wall. 3:17 p.m., exactly when young Thomas Hargrove typically arrives from his duties at the harbourmaster's office. "Afternoon, Mrs. Catri," calls Thomas, his gangly 17-year-old frame still awkward in his newly acquired clerk's uniform. "Got those special brass fittings you ordered from Boston? Captain Reynolds said to tell you they came all the way. In from Switzerland, just like you specified." "Good afternoon, Thomas," Celine responds, her voice carrying a musical cadence that 3 years in this hard-scrabble American port hasn't diminished. "Please set them on the workbench by the calibration tools." Her eyes instinctively track his movements while her hands never pause in their work, a habit from years. When looking away from a royal charge could mean a blade between unsuspecting ribs. What Thomas doesn't see, what no one in Blackwater Bay sees, is that the beautiful inlaid panels decorating the shop walls conceal reinforced steel plating, capable of stopping bullets. The ornate chandelier hanging from the ceiling contains a sophisticated pressure plate system that can seal the shop entirely within seconds. The antique display cases are strategically placed to create a defensive perimeter, and the charming brass gear paperweights arranged on her desk are perfectly balanced for throwing with lethal accuracy. Harbour's buzzing about those new men in town, Thomas mentions, setting down the small wooden box of fittings. 4 of them arrived on the Providence yesterday. Well-dressed but rough-looking, asking questions about property values and businesses. Dad says they've been spending freely at the taverns but not saying much about their business. Celine merely nods, her focus seemingly on the pocket watch before her, though her mind instantly categorizes this information alongside other subtle changes she's noted in recent days. unfamiliar footsteps passing her shop after midnight. A black carriage with unmarked trunks, conversations at the marketplace about strangers asking very specific questions about the town's wealthier merchants. "I'll keep my ears open," she replies, her voice carrying that unique softness that somehow makes people lean in slightly to hear her, a technique she had learned long ago in the royal courts, where being underestimated was a tactical advantage. Speak softly, and people reveal more than they intend while straining to listen. Through her window, Celine watches Constable Blackwood make his afternoon patrol, his gait and posture revealing a man who takes his responsibilities seriously, but hasn't faced genuine violence. His right knee bears an old injury, likely from a fall rather than combat, and his hand rests too casually on his truncheon, revealing no true understanding of how quickly it might need to be deployed. Her eyes automatically scan for sightlines, calculating distances, identifying potential cover, habits she maintains despite 3 years of peaceful small-town life. The bell chimes again as Martha Winters, who runs the town's most reputable boarding house, enters with her customary enthusiasm. "Celine, the anniversary clock you repaired for me has been keeping perfect time. My guests from Philadelphia were absolutely fascinated by its mechanism, said they'd never seen such fine craftsmanship outside of Europe." "Thank you, Martha," Celine answers, already moving to retrieve the woman's order, a delicate lady's pendant watch with hand-painted enamel facing. Her body shifts with an economy of motion that speaks of disciplined training rather than mere efficiency. "The engraving technique is from my homeland. My materials may be limited here, but the principles remain sound." The lie comes easily, practiced over 3 years of crafting her cover story. Her homeland of Indari had indeed been renowned for its artisans, but Celine had never apprenticed in watchmaking until arriving in America. The engraving technique had actually come from the royal weaponsmith who had crafted the ceremonial but lethal blades carried by the Queen's Guard, ornate in appearance but perfectly balanced for combat. "Have you met the new men asking about purchasing businesses on Merchant Street?" Martha asks, leaning against the counter, her expression concerned beneath a forced casualness. 4 men in expensive suits, but with the hands and eyes of laborers. Not businessmen. They've taken 3 rooms at Ellis's Tavern, paying double rate without negotiation. "I haven't had the pleasure," Celine replies, though she's noted one of them passing her shop 3 times in the past 2 days, walking slower than regular pedestrian traffic, observing. Old instincts had prompted her to memorize his gait, to note the distinctive scar along his jawline, to spot the unnatural bulge of a concealed weapon beneath his expensive jacket. "Well, they've been asking all kinds of questions about property deeds, business revenues, which merchants might be struggling financially," Martha continues, unaware that Celine is absorbing every detail with professional assessment. "Particularly interested in businesses along the waterfront, especially those with access to the deeper harbour channels. Constable Blackwood doesn't like the look of them, says they're too polished for ordinary investors, too interested in our shipping schedules, in customs procedures." Celine's hands maintain their steady work as she wraps Martha's order in tissue paper, but her mind shifts through potential scenarios with the cool efficiency that once made her the most trusted guardian in the Indari royal household. The pattern is familiar. Advanced scouts identifying targets for acquisition, assessing security measures, mapping strategic positions. Not garden-variety criminals, but organized predators with specific objectives. "It's wise to be cautious with unfamiliar investors," Celine offers neutrally, though her mind has already categorized these strangers as a potential threat requiring further assessment. Legitimate opportunities rarely arrive unannounced. After Martha leaves, Selina moves to the large regulator clock at the back of her shop, ostensibly to check its accuracy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The action allows her to glance out the rear window, confirming what she already suspects. Two men in tailored suits stand across the street, one apparently admiring the shipyard view, while the other makes notes in a small leather book. Their casual interest doesn't fool her for a second. Surveillance professionals, but not government-sanctioned. Private operators with military background, mercenaries rather than official agents. Her assessment comes automatically, years of training, categorizing potential threats with detached precision. The taller one maintains too perfect a posture, military trained, but trying to appear civilian. The second man's eyes scan in systematic patterns rather than the random observation of a genuine tourist. Both keep their dominant hands free and maintain precise spacing between each other, her combat trained to operate as a unit. The bell chimes again as Harbour Master Winslow enters, his usually confident expression replaced with concern. "Mrs. Cattry?" he greets, his voice lower than usual. "Just wanted to make sure you'll be attending tonight's Merchant Council meeting. Some matters might concern you, being one of the more successful establishments on this street. I've heard there are investors interested in our little community," she responds, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that makes him blink first. "Yes, well, that's part of it." He glances around the empty shop before continuing. "Between us, I don't like them. Too smooth, too rehearsed. Asking about our shipping security, our night patrols, our property laws. Strange questions for business investors. Winslow doesn't notice how Celine's posture shifts subtly, how her weight redistributes to the balls of her feet, how her hand rests near a slender brass tool within easy reach. All unconscious preparations for potential threats that 3 years of peace haven't erased. "I appreciate the warning," she says simply. "I'll be there." After he leaves, Celine moves with new purpose. She turns the sign on her door to "closed for inventory," despite it being only 4 p.m. In the privacy of her back workshop, she pulls out a small key from a chain around her neck and unlocks a hidden compartment beneath her workbench. Inside lies a slim wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl in an intricate pattern that appears decorative but actually forms a complex cipher. From this box, she retrieves a communication device that hasn't been used in 3 years. She composes a brief, encoded message. "Potential situation in Blackwater Bay. Surveillance noted. Background check required on 4 subjects." The message goes to a secure address that hasn't been used since she orchestrated her disappearance after the assassination attempt that claimed her Queen's husband and left Celine officially registered as deceased alongside him. While waiting for a response, Celine does what she's done every day for 3 years. She checks her security measures. The watchmaker's shop appears ordinary to townsfolk, but it's built like a fortress. Reinforced doors, impact-resistant glass disguised as charming vintage panes, strategic sightlines to all approaches, multiple exit routes concealed as storage closets. 3 years of peace haven't dulled her preparedness. Each shipment of parts has brought components for security systems. Each renovation has added another layer of protection, and her weekly orders of specialized tools have sometimes concealed equipment or information from her former colleagues. Behind her workshop, hidden by a false wall that appears to be vintage brick matching the building's historic construction, lies a small room containing emergency supplies, communications equipment, weapons, and multiple sets of identification documents. The room that not even Thomas, who has delivered packages to her for over a year, knows exists. Celine checks her communication device to find a response already waiting. Subjects identified: Donovan Blackwell's crew, former military contractors, now Working private acquisition. Recent connection to Sebastian Caney, shipping magnate with suspected involvement in forced acquisitions along eastern seaboard. The name sends an electric current through her system. Sebastian Caney, the shipping magnate whose vessels had been used 3 years ago to smuggle assassins into the royal palace of Indari. The attack that had left the Queen's consort dead, despite Celine's desperate efforts to save him. The man she had believed was safely imprisoned in her homeland. She types back, "Confirmed sighting of Caney?" The response comes quickly. "Negative. Advanced team only. Caney operates remotely. Pattern matches previous forced acquisitions in port towns. Intimidation followed by violence if necessary. 4 additional operatives identified on vessels approaching your location." Celine's mind calculates possibilities with cold precision. Blackwell's team is Caney's known operational arm. Their presence in Blackwater Bay cannot be coincidence. Either they've found her, unlikely given the thoroughness of her disappearance, or they're setting up an acquisition operation in what they believe is an unprotected port town. Neither possibility bodes well for the community she's come to call home. The device buzzes once more. Multiple similar operations documented in last 6 months. Pattern: acquire strategic port businesses through intimidation, establish smuggling network, expand control through violence if needed. Additional intelligence suggests connection to foreign weapons shipments, assets on standby if required. 3. Years ago, Scenic had walked away from violence, from duty, from the weight of royal protection after failing to save her queen's beloved husband despite taking 3 bullets in the process. Declared dead alongside him, she had chosen a new life in a place where no one would look for a supposedly deceased Indari royal guard. A remote American port town with access to shipping routes but far from international attention. Now it seems the very forces she had once fought have found her territory regardless, threatening the quiet existence she's built and the community that has accepted her without question. The afternoon passes with Celine maintaining her careful routine, finishing repairs on a grandfather clock, polishing watch cases, updating her ledgers, while her mind works on contingency plans with methodical precision. Through her window, she observes one of Blackwell's men walking down Merchant Street with Constable Blackwood, gesturing expansively as if sharing grand visions for development. The constable's posture reveals skepticism, but also the fundamental disadvantage of a good man who cannot recognize the predator walking beside him. The man is exactly as her intelligence described. Early 40s, military bearing beneath the expensive casual clothes, the confidence of someone accustomed to violence who believes himself among sheep rather than wolves. His right hand gestures naturally, but his left remains suspiciously close to his waistcoat, likely concealing a compact firearm. Most telling is how his eyes scan buildings, alleyways and sightlines, with the same automatic assessment that Celine herself performs daily. His gaze pauses on her watchmaker's shop momentarily, and though she appears absorbed in adjusting a clock mechanism, Celine notes how his attention lingers on her building's unusual features: the slightly reinforced doorframe disguised as decorative woodwork, the subtly angled windows that give perfect visibility to both approaches. For a moment, just a flicker, their eyes meet through the window. Celine keeps her expression neutral, embodying the unassuming widow the town knows her to be. The man's face reveals nothing, but she recognizes the subtle shift in his stance, the unconscious preparation for potential threat assessment. He's good, not as good as she was in her prime, but dangerous nonetheless. As afternoon fades, toward evening, Celine closes her shop with practiced efficiency. She retrieves items from her hidden room that she hasn't used in 3 years, a set of slender throwing knives that can be concealed within her hairpins, a garrote disguised as an ordinary ribbon for her dress, and a small communication device. that connects to her secure network. She dresses for the Merchant Council meeting with careful consideration, layers that won't restrict movement, boots that allow for quick response, a shawl that could serve multiple tactical purposes if needed. To the townsfolk, she'll appear as she always does, the elegant foreign widow who brings old-world craftsmanship to their community. Only she knows that every aspect of her appearance is calculated for optimal defensive capability. As Selene locks her shop door, she spots another well-dressed stranger across the street, pretending to admire the harbour view while maintaining perfect positioning to observe the entirety of Merchant Street. 3 years ago, she was the shield between royalty and those who would do them harm. Now, as she walks toward the town hall where Blackwater Bay's merchants are gathering, she feels that mantle settling across her shoulders once more. These people, Thomas, who delivers her packages each week, Martha, who champions her craftsmanship, Harbour Master Winslow, who ensured her business permits were expedited when she arrived, have become her responsibility. Blackwell's crew, and whoever commands them, have come to her town, her territory, threatening people under her protection. 3 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. Blackwell's crew is about to learn why. Her code name in the Royal Security Division was Nightingale, not for her voice, but because those who heard her approach in darkness rarely lived to see the dawn. The most lethal guardian in the Queen's service now protects a different kingdom, a small American port town that has given her refuge when she needed it most. The evening light casts long shadows across Blackwater Bay's cobblestone streets as Selene Katri walks toward the Merchant Council meeting. To observers, she's merely a respected local businesswoman. Only she knows that with each step, the Nightingale draws closer to returning. Blackwater Bay's town hall stood as a testament to the port's brief but prosperous history. A handsome, red-brick building crowned with a copper-domed clock tower that had turned verdigris with age. Inside, beneath ornate tin ceilings and gas lamps converted to electricity, the Merchant Council gathered around a massive oak table that bore the scars of a century of commerce negotiations. Selene entered precisely 7 minutes after the scheduled start, enough time to assess the situation, but not so late as to draw undue attention. She chose a seat that offered clear sightlines to all 3 exits while placing her back against the wood-paneled wall. The mood in the room carried a tension unfamiliar to the normally pragmatic business discussions. Whispered conversations ceased as Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order, his usual bluster subdued by obvious concern. Selene catalogued the faces around the table with practiced efficiency. 17 familiar merchants, 3 town officials, and 4 strangers in tailored suits whose posture revealed military discipline beneath affected casualness. "As you all know," Harrison began, "we've been approached by representatives of Atlantic Mercantile Holdings with interest in significant investment throughout our harbour district." He gestured toward the strangers with practiced political courtesy that failed to mask his unease. "Mr. Donovan Blackwell and his associates have proposed substantial capital improvements to our shipping facilities and several key businesses. Along Merchant Street," Blackwell rose with confident authority, a broad-shouldered man whose manicured appearance couldn't quite conceal the predator beneath. Selene assessed him with clinical precision. Early 50s, right-handed, military bearing with private sector polish, slight compensation in his left leg suggesting a previous injury, eyes that systematically scanned the room with tactical awareness rather than social interest. "Thank you, Mayor Harrison." Blackwell's voice carried the cultivated resonance of someone accustomed to command. "My colleagues and I represent a consortium of investors who recognize untapped potential in ports like Blackwater Bay, historic communities with strategic harbor access, but without the regulatory complications of larger commercial centers. As Blackwell launched into a presentation filled with promises of prosperity and modernization, Celine observed the subtle dynamics unfolding throughout the room. The glances exchanged between Blackwell's men carried coded information. Position, confirmation, surveillance assignments, threat assessments. The merchants' reactions revealed divisions forming, enthusiasm from struggling businesses, skepticism from established ones, outright suspicion from those with experience beyond Blackwater Bay. Our initial phase involves acquiring key properties to establish a cohesive commercial framework. Blackwell continued, unfurling a map across the table. We've identified several businesses that would benefit from immediate capital investment, beginning with these waterfront properties. Celine noted with interest that her shop was not among those highlighted, a tactical oversight that confirmed these men hadn't identified her as anything beyond an unremarkable shopkeeper. Their focus centered instead on businesses with direct harbour access, particularly the chandlery, shipwright and harbour master's office, strategic points controlling maritime commerce. And what happens to current owners who aren't interested in selling? The question came from Jacob Turner, the grizzled shipwright whose family had built vessels in Blackwater Bay for 3 generations. Some of us have generations invested in these properties. We offer generous compensation well above market value, Blackwell replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. Though naturally we hope to work with existing proprietors rather than replace them. The implied threat hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Celine recognized the approach from similar operations she'd encountered during her security career. Establish leverage through key acquisitions, isolate resistance, then apply escalating pressure until opposition crumbled. And your interest in our shipping schedules and customs procedures? Harbour Master Winslow challenged, his weathered face creased with suspicion. Strange priorities. For property investors, one of Blackwell's men, younger with the hard eyes of someone who enjoyed violence, shifted forward slightly before Blackwell's subtle hand gesture stopped him. The brief interaction confirmed Celine's assessment of their hierarchy and temperament. Due diligence, Harbour Master, Blackwell responded smoothly. Understanding commercial patterns is essential to responsible investment. Surely that makes sense. To a man of your experience. As the meeting progressed into pointed questions and evasive answers, Celine maintained her quiet observation, absorbing details that others missed. The way Blackwell's men had positioned themselves throughout the room, covering exits, maintaining sightlines. The subtle communications device visible in the youngest associate's ear when he turned his head. The unnatural bulge beneath tailored jackets suggesting concealed weapons. Mrs. Cartry. Her name pulled her from tactical assessment as Blackwell's attention fixed on her with sudden interest. You've been notably silent. As one of Merchant Street's more unique establishments, I'd value your perspective. The room's attention shifted to Celine, exactly the situation she would normally avoid. She recognized the approach: isolate the quiet observer, force public positioning, assess reactions for weaknesses. With deliberate care, she adopted the persona she'd cultivated for 3 years, the reserved widow with expertise in timepieces but little interest in politics. I find listening more valuable than speaking, Mr. Blackwell, she replied, her accent carefully maintained at the level the townsfolk expected. Though I admire ambition, prosperity rarely arrives with such orchestrated introduction. In my experience, genuine opportunity seldom requires such performance. Something flickered in Blackwell's eyes, not recognition of her true identity, but reassessment of her as an opponent rather than background element. One of his associates leaned forward, whispering something that made Blackwell study her with renewed intensity. Your experience sounds fascinating, Mrs. Cartry, he responded with calculated charm. Perhaps we could discuss it privately. Your Watchmaking business, while not central to our current acquisitions, represents the kind of craftsmanship our consortium appreciates. My schedule is quite full with repairs, Celine deflected smoothly, though I'm always available for timepiece. Consultations during business hours. The exchange, seemingly innocuous to observers, established clear battle lines. Blackwell had identified her as someone requiring further assessment. She had denied him the private access he sought while maintaining her cover identity. As the meeting concluded with promises of future discussions, Celine noted how Blackwell's men subtly positioned themselves near the exits, observing each merchant's reactions and conversations. The tallest associate, sandy-haired with a boxer's broken nose poorly disguised beneath gentlemanly presentation, made detailed notes in a small leather book, cataloguing allies, identifying opposition, mapping pressure points for future. Leverage. Celine timed her departure to coincide with a group of merchants, maintaining casual conversation about a pocket watch repair as they exited together. Outside, the evening had deepened, gas lamps casting pools of yellowish light across cobblestone streets, now shrouded in harbour fog that rolled in with the changing tide. Mrs. Catry. Martha Winters fell into step beside her as they turned onto Merchant Street. I don't like those men, not one bit. Did you see how they watched everyone? Not like businessmen, like wolves counting sheep. An apt observation, Celine replied quietly, though wolves typically announce themselves with less expensive tailoring. Martha's nervous laugh carried genuine fear beneath social courtesy. Jacob Turner says he's been receiving unusual pressure about his property deed, supposed irregularities in the county records that never existed before, and the Henderson's shipping supply store suffered a mysterious break-in last night. Nothing valuable taken, just their business ledgers and client records. Intelligence gathering, Celine noted. Standard procedure before applying targeted pressure. Identify vulnerabilities, isolate potential resistance, establish leverage points. Her suspicion deepened that this operation was following Keynes' established methodology for forced acquisition of strategic port assets. Martha, Celine said carefully, perhaps you should consider visiting your sister in Boston for a few weeks. A change of scenery before winter arrives. Martha studied her with shrewd assessment that belied her typically fluttering demeanor. You know something about these men, don't you? Something more than what was said tonight? Celine weighed her. Response: balancing operational security against community protection. I recognize certain patterns from my previous life in Europe. Men like these operated during uncertain times, acquiring assets through methods that began with papers and ended with less civilized approaches. You think they'll turn violent? Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. They already are violent, Celine corrected gently. They simply haven't yet revealed that aspect to Blackwater Bay. They parted at the corner of Merchant and Harbour Streets, Martha heading toward her boarding house while Celine continued toward her shop. The fog had thickened, transforming familiar streets into ghostly passages where footsteps echoed strangely and shadows gained substance. Selene's senses heightened with practiced vigilance. 3 years of peace hadn't dulled her awareness. If anything, the contrast between Blackwater Bay's usual tranquility and tonight's tension sharpened her perception of subtle threats. The footsteps that had maintained distance since the town hall, measured, deliberate, a man of approximately 80 kilograms favoring his right leg slightly. One of Blackwell's men, certainly, maintaining surveillance without attempting concealment. A message rather than serious tactical operation. Rather than returning directly to her shop, Celine chose a circuitous route that would reveal whether the surveillance was simple observation or something more coordinated. She turned down Chandler's Alley, a narrow passage between the cooperage and print shop, her pace unhurried but purposeful. The footsteps behind her adjusted, quickening slightly, then resuming measured pace. Amateur work compared to the sophisticated surveillance she'd evaded in royal capitals, but effective enough for intimidating merchants in a small port town. Emerging onto Whalers Row, Celine noted a second watcher positioned near the harbour master's office, the younger associate from the meeting smoking a cigarette with casual affect that failed to disguise his tactical positioning covering the street's exit. Coordinated surveillance then, establishing presence rather than gathering specific intelligence. Celine allowed them to track her progress through 3 more streets before implementing a simple evasion pattern that would appear as random navigation to untrained observers, but would effectively expose any additional surveillance. By the time she approached her shop from the rear alley, she had confirmed 4 watchers in total, a significant resource commitment that suggested Blackwell considered her worthy of special attention despite her seemingly peripheral position. Among Blackwater Bay's merchants, her shop stood dark against the misty night, exactly as she had left it. To casual observation, it appeared secure and undisturbed, but Celine's trained eye immediately detected subtle signs of intrusion. The rear window latch microscopically misaligned, the thin horsehair she had positioned across the workshop. Dukkha threshold now missing. Amateur work again, professional enough to avoid detection by ordinary citizens, but laughably obvious to someone with her training. They wanted her to know they had violated her space while maintaining plausible deniability, another intimidation tactic, effective against ordinary shopkeepers, but revealing valuable information to Celine about their operational methods and priorities. Rather than immediately entering, she circled to a concealed vantage point that offered clear sightline to both her shop and the street beyond. Within minutes, she confirmed her suspicion. 2 of Blackwell's men maintained positions with direct observation of her shop, awaiting her return to gauge her reaction to their intrusion. Celine smiled in the darkness, a predator's expression no resident of Blackwater Bay had ever witnessed. These men played checkers while she had spent decades mastering chess. Their clumsy intimidation attempt had provided valuable intelligence about their surveillance capacity, operational protocols, and tactical limitations, all without revealing anything about her own capabilities. Using the fog as cover, she approached her shop through a route that exploited the watcher's blind spots, accessing a concealed entrance she had installed during renovations 2 years earlier, a modification explained to local craftsmen as traditional design from my homeland, but actually replicating a security feature from the royal palace. Inside, her workshop, protected from observation by heavy curtains, Celine conducted a meticulous assessment of the intrusion. The search had been thorough, but remarkably contained. Business ledgers examined, correspondence rifled, workshop tools inventoried, but with everything replaced in near-perfect positioning. Not common thieves, but trained operatives conducting. Professional intelligence gathering. Most telling was what they had missed: the hidden compartments containing her true identity documents, the concealed room behind the false brick wall, the sophisticated surveillance countermeasures integrated throughout the shop's seemingly antiquated infrastructure. Their search had revealed them as dangerous but not exceptional, a threat requiring respect but not fear. Celine moved to her communication device, sending an encrypted update to her network. Surveillance confirmed. 4 operatives. Standard intimidation protocol initiated. Background intelligence on Atlantic Mercantile Holdings requested. The response arrived faster than expected. Corporate shell confirmed. Multiple layers obscuring ownership traced to Caney shipping interests. Pattern matches previous acquisitions in Portsmouth and New Bedford. Blackwell's crew expanded to 12 operatives in those locations before escalating to physical enforcement. Celine processed this with clinical detachment. The pattern was becoming clearer: establish presence, identify strategic assets, isolate resistance, escalate pressure from economic to physical. Classic organized criminal methodology disguised. Beneath corporate legitimacy, a second message appeared: arms shipment suspected as primary objective. Intelligence suggests Caney establishing privatized smuggling network along eastern seaboard, utilizing acquired port businesses as cover. Previous acquisitions followed by documented weapons traffic within 60 days. The larger picture crystallized. In Celine's mind, Blackwater Bay wasn't simply a business opportunity, it was a strategic acquisition in an expanding criminal enterprise masked as corporate development. The same methodology Caney had employed to smuggle assassins into her homeland was being replicated on American shores, with her adopted community now targeted as the next link in his chain. Celine moved to the hidden room behind the false wall, accessing equipment she hadn't used in 3 years. With practiced efficiency, she assembled a comprehensive security system, motion sensors disguised as watchmakers' tools positioned throughout the shop, pressure plates beneath strategically placed rugs, infrared triggers concealed within, antique clock cases. From a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, she retrieved items that connected her to the life she had abandoned. A slender case containing specialized blades designed for her unique fighting style, a set of manipulation tools disguised as watchmakers' instruments, and a small leather pouch of caltrops so finely crafted they resembled decorative metal stars until deployed against pursuers. As she worked, Celine reflected on the irony of her situation. 3 years ago, she had exchanged the burden of protecting royalty for the peaceful anonymity of craftsmanship, believing she had left violence behind. Now she found herself establishing defensive protocols not for a single royal charge, but for an entire community that had accepted her without question or suspicion. By midnight, her preparations complete, Celine settled into the meditative breathing, technique that had sustained her through countless surveillance operations. 4 slow breaths drawing oxygen deep into the lungs, held for 7 counts, released for 8, the rhythm establishing perfect balance between alertness and stillness. Her body appeared at rest, while her mind maintained tactical awareness of every approach to her position. Through the night, Blackwell's watchers maintained their surveillance, rotating positions at precise 3-hour intervals that confirmed their military background. Celine noted their patterns, identified their blind spots, catalogued their individual characteristics for future reference. The tallest favored his left knee slightly, suggesting previous injury. The youngest consistently touched the weapon, concealed at his back when startled, revealing poor tactical discipline. The oldest maintained the most professional surveillance distance, but smoked cigars whose distinctive aroma compromised his position in the fog. Shortly before dawn, her communication device activated with new intelligence. Sebastian Kane's personal vessel, Criterion, documented departing New York Harbor yesterday. Projected course consistent with Blackwater Bay arrival within 48 hours. Previous pattern indicates direct involvement only for final acquisition phase or when resistance encountered. The information shifted Celine's tactical assessment significantly. Caney's personal involvement suggested escalation beyond standard operations, either because Blackwater Bay held special strategic value or because resistance had been reported. Either possibility compressed her timeline for countermeasures. As first light broke through the harbor fog, Selene moved with new purpose. She retrieved her ledger, making detailed notes with the precise handwriting that had once recorded royal security protocols, but now documented the business of watchmaking. To anyone observing through her windows, she appeared to be conducting ordinary morning inventory, a dedicated shopkeeper beginning her day with meticulous record-keeping. In reality, she was mapping defensive positions, documenting Blackwell's surveillance patterns, and establishing response protocols for various escalation scenarios. The familiar work of protection planning flowed from her hands with practiced efficiency, the 3-year gap since her royal service seeming to vanish as her mind recalibrated to the rhythms of strategic security assessment. The bell above her, Dugala, chimed at precisely 7:15 a.m. as Thomas Hargrove arrived. earlier than his usual afternoon deliveries. His gangly teenage frame carried unusual tension, his typically open expression clouded with concern. "Mrs. Khatri," he began without preamble, "Dad says I should tell you those men were asking specific questions about your shop last night at the tavern. Wanted to know how long you've been here, where you came from, whether anyone from your homeland ever visits." The boy's eyes reflected genuine worry. "They were offering money for information about you." Celine maintained her composed demeanor, though her tactical assessment immediately elevated. Direct intelligence gathering, focused on her background, suggested they had identified irregularities in her cover identity, likely discovered during their search of her shop. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she always used with him, though her mind was rapidly recalculating threat assessments. "People often find foreigners curious, nothing to concern yourself with." The boy hesitated, then leaned closer across the counter. "That's not all. Late last night, 2 of them were watching your shop from the alley. Dad says they're not regular. Businessman says they carry themselves like the mercenaries he encountered during his Navy service." Celine studied Thomas with new appreciation for his observational skills and his father's insight. The Hargroves had clearly perceived the threat beneath Blackwell's corporate veneer more accurately than most in Blackwater Bay. "Your father is a perceptive man," she acknowledged. "Perhaps you and your family might consider visiting relatives for a few days. A short holiday before the shipping season intensifies." Thomas straightened, his adolescent pride visibly engaged. "Dad says we don't run from trouble. He's organizing some of the dock workers to keep watch over businesses on Merchant Street at night. Says these fancy gentlemen might think twice about any mischief if they know local folks are standing together." The information shifted Celine's tactical calculation. Community resistance was organizing independently of her intervention, a development that created both opportunities and complications. Civilian defenders would complicate Blackwell's operation, but also risked triggering more aggressive response. "If not properly coordinated, your father's initiative is commendable," she said carefully, "though perhaps best implemented with some discretion. Men like these often respond poorly to direct challenges." After Thomas departed, Celine moved to the window, observing Merchant Street with new awareness of the forces gathering on both sides. The community she had adopted was preparing to defend itself against predators it only partially understood, while those predators were initiating standard intimidation protocols that would inevitably escalate toward violence when resistance was encountered. And at the center stood Celine Khatri, no longer the feared nightingale of the Indari Royal Guard, but not merely the widow watchmaker of Blackwater Bay either. Something in between, with the skills of the former and the connections of the latter. A protector without official sanction, preparing to defend not a royal principle, but an entire community against a threat they weren't equipped to recognize or counter. The morning light strengthened, burning away harbor fog to reveal Blackwater Bay in its workaday clarity, fishing boats returning with dawn catches, merchants opening shops, dock workers beginning their labor. Ordinary people conducting ordinary lives, unaware that shadows gathered around them, that violence approached their shores, disguised as opportunity. Across the street, one of Blackwell's men leaned against a lamp-post, no longer bothering to disguise his surveillance. Their strategy had shifted from covert to overt intimidation, a classic escalation pattern that confirmed Celine's assessment of their methodology. She met his gaze directly, allowing him a glimpse beneath her carefully maintained facade. Not the full revelation of the Nightingale's lethal capacity, but enough steel in her eyes to give a trained operative pause. A message as clear as the one they had sent by searching her shop. "I see you. I recognize your purpose, and I am not intimidated." The man straightened slightly, his hand drifting toward his concealed weapon, before professional discipline reasserted control. He gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement between professionals that transcended their opposing purposes, before turning to walk toward the harbor, where Blackwell had established temporary headquarters in a requisitioned shipping office. Celine returned to her workbench, resuming the delicate repair of a ship's chronometer with the same precision she had once applied to royal protection planning. The familiar rhythm of watchmaking provided perfect cover for her mind to process tactical scenarios with methodical thoroughness. Sebastian Caney was coming to Blackwater Bay, bringing with him the violence that had once reached across oceans, to shatter her previous life. This time, however, she would not be constrained by royal protocols or official chains of command. This time, the Nightingale would meet threat with counter-threat, protection with prevention, intimidation with response, as her skilled hands calibrated the delicate mechanism before her. Celine's mind calculated trajectories of a different kind, not the movements of gears and springs, but the positioning of operatives and civilians, the timing of intervention and extraction, the precision application of force where vulnerability existed. 3 years of peace had been her choice. Now violence approached the community that had given her refuge, threatening people who had asked nothing of her but craftsmanship and quiet neighborliness. The Nightingale had slept within the watchmaker for 3 years. It was time for her to wake. Dawn broke over Blackwater Bay with unusual brilliance, the morning sun transforming the harbor's waters into sheets of hammered gold. Fishermen who had spent decades reading weather in the sky exchanged troubled glances. Such radiance often preceded the fiercest storms. By noon, their foreboding seemed prophetic as an unseasonable fog rolled in from the Atlantic, enveloping the port in ghostly shrouds that transformed familiar streets into mysterious passages where visibility extended barely 20 paces. For Celine, the weather presented both tactical advantage and complications. The fog would obscure movement, allowing her to implement countermeasures with reduced observation, but it also created ideal conditions for Blackwell's men to escalate operations against targeted businesses. Reduced visibility meant fewer witnesses, condensed response time from local authorities, and optimal conditions for applying pressure that would remain plausibly deniable in clearer light. She moved through her morning routine with calculated precision, each action serving multiple purposes. Adjusting the display window provided opportunity to confirm surveillance positions, 2 of Blackwell's men now maintaining open observation from the tobacconist's shop across the street. Receiving a shipment of specialized gears from the morning courier allowed her to send encoded messages through her established network. Instructing Thomas on proper cleaning of chronometer mechanisms gave her legitimate reason to warn him to avoid certain streets after dark. Mrs. Cattry, Thomas asked, as she demonstrated the proper application of specialized oil to delicate gears. "Why are those men still watching your shop? You don't even have harbor access, like the businesses they're interested in. Intimidation is most effective when applied indiscriminately," Celine replied, her hands never pausing in their work. "Fear spreads more efficiently when targets appear, random rather than strategic." The boy's brow furrowed as he processed this insight with remarkable acuity. "Like when Billy Markham's gang breaks windows on different streets each night instead of focusing on one area. Makes the constable spread. His patrol's too thin." "Precisely." Celine allowed herself a small smile at his perceptiveness. "Though I suspect these men will find Blackwater Bay less compliant than they anticipated." Shortly after Thomas departed, the bell above her door announced a different visitor. Harbourmaster Winslow entered, his weathered face bearing fresh lines of concern, cap clutched in gnarled hands that had guided ships through treacherous channels for 3 decades. "Mrs. Cattry," he began without preamble, "there's been trouble." Celine gestured him toward the small sitting area she maintained for customers awaiting repairs, positioning him away from windows while offering tea with the composed efficiency that characterized all her movements. "Jacob Turner was attacked last night," Winslow continued once they were seated, voice lowered despite the empty shop. "Two men in masks caught him closing his shipyard, beat him badly, broken arm, cracked ribs, claimed it was robbery, but took nothing except his property deed and business ledgers." The information confirmed Celine's assessment of Blackwell's escalation timeline. Turner had been the most vocal opponent at the town meeting, making him the logical first target. "For physical intimidation, is he receiving medical care?" she asked, mind already calculating adjustment to her countermeasures schedule. "Dr. Morrison's treating him, but Jacob's refusing to report it officially." Winslow's weathered hands tightened around his teacup. "Says Constable Blackwood's been spending unusual time with these investors, sharing drinks while they review. Town ordinances together. Local law enforcement compromised. Another predictable development that nonetheless accelerated the timeline." Celine had observed Blackwell cultivating the constable, but hadn't anticipated such rapid capitulation. "There's more," Winslow added, leaning closer. "The Providence arrived this morning through the fog, carrying a private passenger who came ashore in a separate launch, bypassing normal harbor procedures. Man named Caney, according to the ship's manifest. Went straight to the harbor hotel with more security than any legitimate businessman needs. Sebastian Caney had arrived earlier than intelligence predicted, a significant development suggesting operations were advancing faster than standard methodology indicated. Whether from excitement over Blackwater Bay's strategic value or pressure from unidentified external factors, the accelerated timeline required immediate response. "Thank you for this information," Celine said, genuine appreciation warming her typically reserved tone. "Your vigilance serves the community well." Winslow studied her with the penetrating gaze of a man accustomed to reading weather patterns on distant horizons. "You're not surprised," he observed. "And you're not afraid, unlike most folks on Merchant Street today." "Fear serves little purpose, beyond alerting us to danger," she replied with careful neutrality. "Once danger is identified, preparation becomes more valuable than concern." The harbormaster's expression shifted subtly, reassessing the quiet watchmaker with new consideration. "Martha Winters mentioned you had experience with men like these in Europe. Said you warned her days before trouble started." Celine neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining the ambiguity that had served her cover identity for 3 years. Different waters, similar currents, predatory patterns transcend geography. Winslow nodded slowly, seeming to reach an internal decision. "Some of us are meeting tonight, Captain Miller's chandlery after closing, folks who won't wait for Constable Blackwood to remember where his loyalties should lie." He paused, weighing his words carefully. "Your perspective would be welcomed, Mrs. Cattry." The invitation represented a critical juncture in Celine's strategic positioning. Maintaining complete separation would preserve operational security, but limit her ability to coordinate community defense. Direct involvement risked exposure of her capabilities, but would allow her to influence civilian response in ways that minimized collateral damage. "I'll consider it," she replied, the non-committal response belying her already formed decision. Community coordination had become essential with Caney's early arrival and law enforcement compromised. After Winslow departed, Celine moved with accelerated purpose. She closed her shop early, citing inventory requirements on the door sign while actually implementing advanced countermeasures throughout key locations on Merchant Street. Each delivery of repaired timepieces to local businesses provided opportunity to place surveillance equipment disguised as decorative elements, establish communication protocols with trusted community members, and identify optimal defensive positions. Throughout the commercial district, by late afternoon, the fog had thickened to unnatural density, transforming Blackwater Bay into a spectral landscape where sound traveled with distorted clarity, while visibility remained severely limited. Celine used the conditions to her advantage, moving through streets with the silent efficiency that had once made her the most feared protector in royal service. Near Turner's shipyard, she identified 3 of Blackwell's men establishing surveillance positions, not the obvious watchers from previous days, but more specialized operatives with military precision in their movement and positioning. Their presence confirmed her assessment that tonight would bring coordinated action against multiple targets rather than continued intimidation. At the harbourmaster's office, she noted similar preparations, a carriage positioned for optimal evacuation routes, men established in covered positions with sightlines to all approaches, communication signals arranged through lantern placements visible despite the fog. Blackwell was implementing professional security protocols beyond what normal business acquisition would require, suggesting tonight's operations carried special significance. Most telling was the activity near the Harbour Hotel, where Sebastian Caney had established his headquarters. Through carefully positioned observation points, Celine documented 8 security operatives, twice the number Blackwell had initially brought to Blackwater Bay, moving equipment from unmarked carriages into the hotel's private entrance. Though the fog obscured specific details, their handling indicated weapons rather than business materials, confirming her intelligence regarding Caney's true operational objectives. As dusk approached, transforming the fog from white to ominous grey, Celine returned to her shop through routes that exploited surveillance blind spots. Inside, protected from observation by heavy curtains, she prepared for the night's inevitable confrontation with methodical precision. From concealed compartments throughout her workshop, she assembled equipment that transformed the watchmaker into the Nightingale. Specialized throwing blades designed for her unique fighting style were secured in custom sheaths at her wrists and ankles. A reinforced bodice beneath her modest dress provided protection against edged weapons without restricting movement. Her hair, normally confined in a simple chignon, now concealed slender metal implements perfect for lock manipulation or, if necessary, penetrating the vulnerable arterial points of an attacker's neck. Most significant was her decision to carry the signature weapon that had earned her code name in royal service, a specialized garrote of her own design, featuring handles of midnight black wood inlaid with mother-of-pearl nightingales. In the hands of a lesser operator, it functioned as standard strangulation equipment. In Celine's hands, it became an extension of her body, capable of disabling multiple opponents through techniques she had developed through decades of protection service. As full darkness descended, Celine activated her communication device one final time, sending a message that would irrevocably change her position in Blackwater Bay. Caney confirmed on site with expanded security detail. Attack anticipated tonight against multiple targets. Intervention protocols initiated. Request intelligence support, but no physical assets. The response came immediately. Confirmation received. Maritime intelligence indicates vessel Criterion, scheduled for rapid departure tomorrow, with cargo manifest listing agricultural equipment, consistent with previous weapons shipment patterns. Local authorities compromised, physical assets on standby despite your request. Celine acknowledged the response while noting her network's willingness to deploy additional operatives despite her directive. Their concern was warranted given Caney's personal involvement, but additional agents would complicate her tactical approach and potentially increase civilian exposure to violence. At precisely 8 o'clock, with darkness fully established and fog providing optimal operational cover, Celine departed for Captain Miller's chandlery. She moved through streets she had navigated daily for 3 years, but with a fundamental difference that would have startled any regular observer of the widow watchmaker. The careful, composed movements of Selena Catri had been replaced by the fluid efficiency of the nightingale, each step precisely measured, each motion economized for silent progress. Her entire body transformed from craftsman to weapon. Captain Miller's chandlery occupied a 3-story brick building at the corner of Merchant and Whaler Streets, its ground floor crowded with maritime supplies, while upper floors served as warehouse space accessed by external loading doors. Celine approached from the harbour side, identifying 2 of Blackwell's men conducting surveillance from concealed positions near the adjacent cooperage. Their positioning confirmed her suspicion that tonight's civilian meeting had been compromised, likely through the constable's loose tongue at the tavern. Rather than approaching directly, Celine implemented a simple counter-surveillance protocol. She circled to the rear of the building, using service alleys to avoid established observation points, then accessed the second floor through a loading door using lock manipulation tools that would have astonished her customers with their difference. From watchmaking instruments, inside she navigated by memory and sound rather than light, moving through stacked crates of ship's supplies toward the muffled voices emanating from the office overlooking the main floor. Through a small observation window, she assessed the gathering before making her presence known. 12 of Blackwater Bay's most established citizens had assembled in the cramped office. Harbour Master Winslow, Captain Miller, Martha Winters, Thomas's father James Hargrove, and 8 others representing businesses targeted in Blackwell's acquisition plan. Their expressions carried varying mixtures of fear, determination, and anger, as Winslow detailed the attacks against Turner and 2 other merchants who had rejected Blackwell's offers. Celine entered silently through a side door, her appearance causing several startled exclamations despite her recognizable identity. Something in her movement, her posture, or her expression had already begun revealing the protector beneath the watchmaker. "Mrs. Catri," Winslow acknowledged with visible relief. "We were just discussing defensive measures for tonight. Intelligence suggests Blackwell's men are planning coordinated action against those who've refused their offers." "Your intelligence is accurate, but incomplete," Celine replied, her voice carrying new authority that silenced the room. Sebastian Kane arrived this morning. His presence indicates operations beyond simple property acquisition. Caney, the shipping magnate. Captain Miller's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. What would bring him personally to our modest port? "Weapons trafficking," Celine stated with certainty that brooked no argument. Blackwater Bay's position offers optimal smuggling routes with minimal federal oversight. Your businesses aren't being acquired for their commercial value, but for their strategic positions controlling harbor access and shipping documentation. The blunt assessment stunned the gathering into momentary silence. James Hargrove recovered first, his naval experience providing context for her conclusions. "That matches the unusual interest they've shown in shipping manifests and customs procedures," he confirmed, expression hardening. "But how could you know this with such certainty?" The question represented the pivotal moment Celine had anticipated since closing her shop. Maintaining her cover identity would limit her effectiveness in coordinating. Community defense, revealing her background, risked exposure that could reach beyond Blackwater Bay to those who still believed the Nightingale had died protecting her queen's consort. "I have experience with Caney's operations in my previous life," she stated, choosing her words with surgical precision. "His methodology in Blackwater Bay matches patterns I observed in European ports. Tonight's planned actions will escalate from intimidation to coordinated violence, targeting specific businesses while establishing operational control over key infrastructure." "You're not just a watchmaker," Martha Winters said quietly. "The statement carrying neither accusation nor surprise, but simple recognition of reality too long ignored. "I am exactly what Blackwater Bay has seen for 3 years," Celine replied. "But before I repaired timepieces, I protected people from men. Like Caney, the deliberate ambiguity satisfied immediate questions while preserving necessary operational security. More important than her identity was the tactical guidance these civilians urgently required. Blackwell's surveillance has already identified this meeting," she continued, gesturing toward the windows where lantern light would be visible to watchers outside. "They'll accelerate their timeline in response. Expected targets include the shipyard, harbour master's office, and shipping registry, all essential to controlling maritime traffic. We've gathered men with military experience," Captain Miller offered. 20 reliable souls with weapons and determination to protect our community." Celine assessed this civilian resistance force with professional calculation. Well-intentioned, but tactically vulnerable, their direct confrontation with Blackwell's specialized operatives would result in casualties without achieving strategic objectives. "Direct opposition would play into their methodology," she explained. "They anticipate resistance and are prepared for conventional confrontation. More effective would be targeted protection of specific assets while implementing countermeasures against their operational timeline." For the next 30 minutes, Celine outlined a defensive strategy that transformed passionate but disorganized resistance into coordinated response. Rather than positioning armed citizens in predictable defensive formations, she established mobile teams focused on evacuation, documentation protection, and strategic infrastructure preservation. "Your advantage lies not in matching their violence, but in denying their objectives," she explained, using Captain Miller's navigation equipment to map key positions throughout the port. "Remove what they seek, protect who they target, preserve evidence of their methods." As she coordinated this civilian response, a distant church bell tolled 9 times, its sound distorted by the unnatural fog that continued to shroud Blackwater Bay. The timing aligned with intelligence from her network regarding Blackwell's operational schedule. Action typically initiated at full darkness, but with sufficient time remaining for evidence removal before morning. "They'll move within the hour," she stated with certainty, born of professional assessment rather than speculation. Implementation should begin immediately. As the gathering dispersed to their assigned responsibilities, Winslow lingered behind, studying Celine with the weathered gaze of a man who had navigated treacherous waters throughout his life. "You're not planning to join any of the teams you've organized," he observed quietly. "My responsibilities lie elsewhere," she confirmed without elaboration. The harbour master nodded slowly, unspoken understanding passing between them. "Whatever. You were before Blackwater Bay, Mrs. Catry. This community has valued your presence these 3 years. Should events tonight necessitate changes to your situation, there are many who would ensure safe passage to wherever you might need to. Go." The offer, genuine, perceptive, and surprisingly accurate in its unstated recognition of her potential need to disappear again, touched Celine more deeply than she had anticipated. 3 years of crafting timepieces among these people had created connections her royal service had never permitted. "Thank you," she replied simply, "though I suspect Blackwater Bay may remain home regardless of tonight's outcome." With civilian defense coordinated, Celine departed Captain Miller's chandlery through routes that avoided Blackwell's surveillance. Rather than returning to her shop, she moved directly toward the harbour hotel where Sebastian Caney had established his headquarters. Intelligence confirmed his central role in tonight's operation. Neutralizing command structure would prove more effective than countering individual actors throughout the port. The hotel rose through the fog like a ghostly apparition, its elegant Victorian architecture transformed by limited visibility into something more ominous. Gas lamps along its covered portico created halos of yellow light, revealing two security operatives maintaining position at the main entrance, while additional watchers patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals. Celine observed from optimal vantage points, cataloguing security protocols with professional assessment. Kaney's personal protection detail implemented more sophisticated measures than Blackwell's general team. Counter-surveillance sweeps, communication verification, overlapping, coverage that minimized blind spots. Not government-trained, but certainly experienced in high-value protection, likely former military, specialized in private security operations. Most telling was their defensive positioning, which focused outward toward predictable approach vectors, rather than maintaining awareness of less conventional infiltration routes. Their training anticipated direct threats from predictable angles, precisely the limitations Celine had exploited throughout her protection career, where adversaries consistently underestimated both her physical capabilities and tactical creativity. Using the fog as concealment, she approached through the hotel's service area, where deliveries were received through a covered portico adjacent to the kitchen. Two of Blackwell's men maintained position there, their attention focused on the street approach rather than the decorative latticework that adorned the portico's upper section. With the fluid grace that had once allowed her to move undetected, through palace corridors crowded with potential assassins, Celine ascended to the second-floor balcony that connected guest rooms facing the harbor. The French doors securing each room featured ornate but woefully inadequate locks that yielded to her specialized tools within seconds. Inside the darkened guest room, Celine paused to confirm its vacancy before proceeding to the corridor beyond. Hotel staff would be minimal at this hour, but Kaney's security detail would maintain interior positions, particularly near his personal quarters. Moving with the silent efficiency that had earned her royal code name, Celine navigated toward the hotel's eastern wing, where intelligence placed Kaney's suite. Her progress through shadowed corridors relied not on sight, but on the heightened situational awareness developed through decades of protection service, sensing occupation through subtle air pressure changes, detecting movement through almost imperceptible vibrations, anticipating patrol patterns through logical security protocols. As she approached the intersection leading to Kaney's quarters, voices drifted from around the corner, not the expected security detail, but Kaney himself. Engaged in conversation with Blackwell, Celine froze, becoming one with the shadows as their words became intelligible. Turner's resistance presents opportunity rather than complication, Kaney was saying, his cultured voice carrying the cold precision she remembered from intelligence briefings in her previous life. Making an example of his shipyard tonight will accelerate compliance from others. Already in progress, Blackwell confirmed. Teams are positioned at primary targets. Once the registry office is secured and documentation removed, we'll implement the final phase at the shipyard and Harbour Master's office simultaneously. And our timetable remains intact for tomorrow night's shipment? Kaney's question carried subtle warning beneath its surface inquiry. The transport crates are prepared as specified, Blackwell assured him. Once tonight's operation establishes effective control of port documentation, we'll process everything through legitimate channels. 50 crates of agricultural equipment, ready for distribution upriver exactly as planned. Excellent. The buyers are particularly eager for this shipment. The unrest in... Their voices faded as they moved down the corridor away from Celine's position, but she had confirmed critical intelligence. Tonight's operation focused on controlling shipping documentation rather than mere property acquisition, and tomorrow would bring weapons shipment through Blackwater Bay's harbour. More significant was her first clear identification of Sebastian Kane since entering the hotel. Though she had only glimpsed his profile in the dimly lit corridor, the confirmation of his physical presence transformed her tactical assessment from intelligence gathering to direct intervention opportunity. Celine advanced with renewed purpose, following at optimal distance to maintain auditory contact without risking detection. Caney and Blackwell continued their operational discussion as they moved toward what appeared to be a makeshift command center established in the hotel's private dining room. Through the partially open door, Celine observed a transformed space, where elegant dining furniture had been replaced by maps, documentation, and communication equipment. 8 of Blackwell's men crowded around a central table where harbor charts had been marked with tactical positions throughout Blackwater Bay. Team 1 reports Turner's men gathering at the shipyard. One operative was reporting as Caney and Blackwell entered. Appears they've established defensive positions, approximately 15 armed civilians. As anticipated, Caney replied with dismissive confidence. Proceed with the primary operation. Their attention on obvious targets will allow uncontested access to the registry office. Sir, we've also identified unusual movement near the chandlery, another man reported. Appears locals are implementing some kind of coordinated response. Across multiple locations, this intelligence caused Caney visible concern, his expression hardening as he studied the harbor map. That suggests organization beyond what we anticipated. Who would coordinate civilian response in this backwater? The question hung in the air as Celine processed tactical options with cold efficiency. The command center contained Caney, Blackwell, and 8 operatives. Eliminating this group would effectively decapitate the operation, but direct confrontation against such numbers carried significant risk, even for her specialized capabilities. More concerning was the operational intelligence she'd gathered. Teams already deployed throughout Blackwater Bay, implementing coordinated attacks against defended positions. Even neutralizing command would not recall those teams already engaged. Celine made her decision with the calculated precision that had characterized her protection career. Direct intervention at the hotel would satisfy personal justice regarding Caney, but failed to achieve optimal community protection. More effective would be targeted interruption of specific operations, beginning with the registry office, where documentation essential to Caney's smuggling operation would be secured. With silent efficiency, she withdrew from her observation position, navigating back through the hotel's service areas toward the harbor district, where Blackwater Bay's future would be determined in the next few hours. Behind her, Sebastian Caney continued deploying men against civilian targets, unaware that the Nightingale had marked him for justice, delayed but not forgotten. The fog swallowed Celine's figure as she moved purposefully toward the registry office. Her royal training now fully engaged in protecting not a sovereign, but an entire community that had given her refuge when she had nothing but her skills and a carefully constructed alias. Tonight, those skills would serve Blackwater Bay as once they had served a distant queen. The Nightingale had returned to darkness, where her song was most lethal. The registry office of Blackwater Bay stood apart from the harbor's more utilitarian structures, a dignified federal-style building of red brick and white columns that housed the port's shipping records, property deeds, and customs documentation. On ordinary nights, a single clerk maintained watch over these precious archives. Tonight, through the disorienting fog, Celine identified 3 of Blackwell's men positioned around the building, their movements betraying professional training. Despite civilian attire, she assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. The night clerk, elderly Mr. Peterson, would pose no obstacle to these men. Their objective was clear: secure documentation necessary for processing illegal weapons, shipments through legitimate channels. Without those records and official stamps, Caney's operation would face significant complications and delays, precious time for authorities beyond compromised Constable Blackwood to be alerted. Rather than approaching directly, Celine circled, to the building's rear courtyard, where tall windows overlooked a small garden. Through one partially illuminated pane, she observed two additional operatives inside, methodically searching through cabinet drawers, while the night clerk sat bound to his chair, blood trickling from a gash above his eye. Their efficiency suggested limited time. They sought specific documents rather than comprehensive acquisition. Scenic calculated options with cold precision. Direct confrontation against 5 trained operatives presented substantial risk, even for her capabilities. More effective would be targeted disruption of their objective while minimizing potential civilian harm to the already injured clerk. The building's design provided her solution. Like many structures in Blackwater Bay, the registry office featured outdated fire safety measures, including a rooftop water reservoir connected to primitive sprinkler systems. In summer months, these reservoirs bred mosquitoes. In winter, they frequently froze and damaged pipes, a system maintained by tradition rather than effectiveness. Selene ascended the building with the fluid grace that had once allowed her to navigate palace architectures undetected, using ornamental moldings and drain pipes as handholds, where others would require proper climbing equipment. Within minutes, she reached the flat roof where the reservoir's outline loomed against the foggy night sky. The mechanism controlling water release required minimal adjustment. With specialized tools retrieved from concealed pockets, Selene manipulated the rusted valve system, creating catastrophic failure rather than controlled release. Water would deluge the offices below, not enough to cause serious injury, but sufficient to damage paper documentation beyond usability, particularly the specialized inks used in official stamps and seals. As water began rushing through aging pipes, Selene repositioned to observe the operation's effect. Through an overhead skylight, she watched chaos erupt below as freezing water cascaded through ceiling fixtures. The 2 interior operatives scrambled to protect documents, shouting contradictory commands, while the bound clerk toppled sideways. In his chair, unable to escape the deluge, the 3 exterior guards rushed inside, creating momentary confusion as water continued pouring through compromised ceiling panels. Their disciplined operation dissolved into damage control, focus shifting from document acquisition to salvage attempts, doomed by the volume of water now flooding the entire office. While their attention remained diverted, Selene descended to ground level and entered through the front door, which they'd left unsecured in their haste. The interior resembled a minor maelstrom. Water 4 inches deep across the wooden floors, papers floating like pale lilies in dark pools, operatives frantically gathering what undamaged documents they could salvage. None noticed her entrance, until she spoke, her voice carrying calm authority that froze them mid-motion. "Gentlemen, I believe the registry office is closed for the evening." 5 heads turned simultaneously, processing her presence with professional assessment rapidly transitioning to threat recognition. Despite her modest dress and diminutive stature, something in her posture communicated lethal capability that transcended appearance. The lead operative recovered first, hand moving toward his concealed weapon with trained efficiency. "Ma'am, this area is restricted due to water damage. Please leave immediately." "I'm afraid I can't do that while Mr. Peterson remains indisposed," Selene replied, gesturing toward the bound clerk, still struggling on the floor. "Perhaps you could release him before departing." Her deliberate courtesy carried unmistakable warning beneath its surface politeness. 2 of the men exchanged glances, their tactical assessment recognizing incongruity between her appearance and demeanor. The leader made his decision with unfortunate predictability, drawing his weapon while signaling his team to defensive positions. "Lady, you've made a serious mistake. Turn around and walk out, and maybe you won't get hurt." Selene sighed, almost imperceptibly, disappointment rather than fear coloring her response. "No, I don't believe I will." What followed unfolded with such balletic precision that the bound clerk would later struggle to describe it coherently. The widow watchmaker transformed before his eyes, her movements exhibiting lethal grace that defied his understanding of human capability. She closed distance to the lead operative before his weapon fully cleared its holster, her hands striking, and pressure points that short-circuited neural pathways controlling voluntary movement. He collapsed without firing a shot, legs buckling beneath him as if strings had been severed from a marionette. The remaining four responded with coordinated efficiency that confirmed their professional training, two drawing firearms, while two others moved to flanking positions with bladed weapons. Their discipline spoke to experience in violent confrontation, their positioning reflecting tactical protocols designed to overwhelm a single opponent through superior positioning. Against an ordinary adversary, their approach would have proven effective. Against the Nightingale of the Indari Royal Guard, it represented textbook predictability that she had countered countless times during protection service. Celine moved like flowing water, her body navigating between bullets rather than opposing them directly. The confined space and poor footing created by flooding worked to her advantage, disrupting their sightlines and stable firing positions. She closed distance to the nearest gunman, redirecting his aim toward overhead pipes rather than employing disarmament techniques that might discharge the weapon toward the vulnerable clerk. The resultant shot shattered aged plumbing, releasing new torrents that further disrupted visibility and coordination among the remaining operatives. Selena used this momentary confusion to retrieve her signature weapon, the specialized garrote concealed within her sleeve. Unlike crude assassination tools, her instrument featured tensile flexibility that transformed it from strangulation device to binding mechanism with simple adjustment to hand positioning. 34 seconds after her initial engagement, 4 of Blackwell's men lay incapacitated on the flooded floor, some unconscious, others immobilized through precision. Application of compression techniques against nerve clusters. The 5th had unwisely attempted escape through the front entrance, only to find himself suddenly airborne as Celine's thrown bowler-style weapon entangled his legs, sending him crashing face-first into the ornate doorframe with sufficient force to render consciousness optional. Celine stood unscathed amid the carnage, water swirling around her ankles as she surveyed the results of her intervention. 5 trained operatives neutralized without sustaining notable injury herself. Not her most efficient performance, but satisfactory given the environmental complications and priority placed on protecting the clerk from crossfire. She moved immediately to Mr. Peterson, cutting his bonds with a slender blade retrieved from her hairpin. The elderly man stared at her with undisguised astonishment, his concept of the widow watchmaker undergoing catastrophic revision. "Mrs. Cattry," he managed, voice trembling as she helped him to a chair positioned on higher ground, away from the worst flooding. What did you—" "Breathe deeply, Mr. Peterson," she instructed, checking his head wound with clinical efficiency. "The laceration is superficial, though you'll need proper medical attention. Can you tell me what documents these men were specifically targeting?" The clerk's professional instincts overrode his shock as he processed her question. "Shipping manifests and customs stamps. They were particularly interested in tomorrow's scheduled departures and the official seals needed for clearance documentation." Celine nodded, the information confirming her intelligence regarding Kaney's operational timeline. "And these materials?" "Ruined," Peterson replied, gesturing toward floating papers and bleeding ink throughout the office. "The water damage is catastrophic. Official stamps are unusable, manifest books destroyed. We'll need to implement emergency protocols, revert to the duplicate records kept at the municipal building." "A process requiring how long?" Celine asked, already calculating impact on Kane's smuggling timeline. 3 days minimum, possibly a week with proper authentication procedures. Perfect. The operation's primary objective achieved without direct confrontation against Kaney's entire organization. Disruption rather than destruction. Delaying rather than defeating. Tactical approaches that created opportunities for legitimate authorities beyond Blackwater Bay to intercept the weapons shipment without requiring her to eliminate every operative. The distant sound of shouting penetrated the registry office's broken windows, drawing Selena's attention toward the harbor. Lantern light flickered through. Fog, as confrontation unfolded elsewhere in Blackwater Bay, the civilian defense team she'd organized, engaging with Blackwell's remaining forces at other strategic locations. "Mr. Peterson, people will arrive shortly to secure this location," she informed the clerk, binding the unconscious operatives with materials improvised from office supplies. "Please inform them these men should be held securely until federal authorities can be contacted." "You're leaving?" he asked, confusion evident as she moved toward the exit. "But there's fighting throughout the harbor district." "Precisely why I'm needed elsewhere," Celine replied, pausing at the doorway. "When questioned later, perhaps you might consider whether you clearly saw the person who intervened here tonight. Perception can be quite unreliable during traumatic events." Understanding dawned in the clerk's eyes as he processed her suggestion. Plausible deniability protecting her identity despite his direct witnessing of her capabilities. He nodded slowly, a silent agreement passing between them. "Though I'm certain," he offered quietly, "that whoever saved an old man's life tonight has earned considerable discretion regarding their methods." Celine acknowledged his loyalty with a slight nod before disappearing into the fog-shrouded street, moving toward the harbor where distant shouts suggested Blackwell's operation confronting unexpected resistance. The registry office intervention had succeeded beyond optimal projections. Documentation destroyed, operatives neutralized, timeline disrupted without compromising her identity beyond necessary parameters. Yet satisfaction remained elusive. As she navigated toward new conflict, Sebastian Caney remained operational, directing remaining assets against the community that had given her refuge. The primary objective had been secured, but personal justice remained unaddressed. The man whose operation had reached across oceans to shatter her previous life now threatened her adopted home. The harbour master's office emerged from swirling fog as Celine approached the waterfront, its windows illuminated by lantern light that cast long shadows across rain-slicked cobblestones. Unlike the registry office, this building showed no external signs of confrontation, no posted guards, no evidence of forced entry, no tactical positioning that suggested ongoing operation. Years of protection experience triggered immediate suspicion. Blackwell's methodology had demonstrated professional thoroughness throughout previous actions. The absence of visible security at a strategic target indicated either operational abandonment or more concerning possibilities. Celine approached with heightened vigilance, using environmental cover to maintain concealment while assessing potential threat patterns. Through ground-floor windows, she observed the harbour master's office in apparent normalcy, papers organized on desks, navigational charts properly stored, equipment maintained in customary locations. Only one element disrupted. This picture of administrative ordinariness, Harbour Master Winslow seated at his desk, posture unnaturally rigid, expression frozen in carefully maintained neutrality, despite the pistol pressed against his temple by Sebastian Kane himself. The tactical situation crystallized with perfect clarity. Caney had adapted to the registry office intervention by consolidating operations at his secondary target, personally implementing control to ensure success despite setbacks elsewhere. Winslow represented both hostage leverage and operational necessity. His authority could override documentation requirements through emergency protocols, providing alternative methodology for clearing the weapons shipment. More concerning was Kaney's deliberate isolation with minimal visible security, suggesting confidence in personal capabilities rather than reliance on subordinates. Intelligence had always classified him as strategic director rather than field operative, making his direct intervention unusual and potentially indicating hidden tactical advantages beyond current assessment. Scenic calculated options with cold precision. Direct confrontation risked Winslow's life, given Kaney's positioning and apparent readiness to eliminate witnesses. Extended surveillance might yield opportunity for safer intervention, but would allow Caney to extract cooperation from Winslow through persuasion or coercion. The decision crystallized as she observed Caney pressing documents toward the harbormaster, clearly demanding signatures that would facilitate tomorrow's shipment despite the registry office setback. Immediate action became necessary, with acceptable risk parameters given Winslow's increasing danger. Celine circled to the office's rear entrance, accessing the lock with specialized tools that transformed tumblers from security measure to entry mechanism within seconds. She moved through darkened back rooms with practiced silence, navigating by memory augmented by ambient light filtering through interior doorways. From the threshold of Winslow's office, she assessed final tactical positioning. Caney stood behind the seated harbormaster, gun maintained at head level, while his free hand pressed papers forward across the desk. Their position offered clean intervention angles without crossfire risk to Winslow, though Caney's stance suggested combat training beyond what intelligence had indicated. "The authorization requires your signature in 3 locations," Caney was saying, voice carrying the cultured authority she remembered from intelligence briefings in her previous life. Emergency clearance protocols superseding standard documentation due to the registry office's unfortunate flooding. "And if I refuse?" Winslow asked, courage evident despite his precarious position. "Then your body joins those of the other inconvenient obstacles to progress," Caney replied with chilling detachment. "Your cooperation determines only the timing of inevitable outcomes, not their nature." "What I find most disturbing," Celine interrupted from the doorway, "is how genuinely you believe that." Both men turned toward her voice, their expressions forming perfect counterpoints, Winslow's featuring surprise transformed by dawning hope. Caney's displaying irritation, shifting rapidly to tactical assessment as he processed her presence. Recognition flickered in his eyes as he studied her, connections forming between present appearance and intelligence profiles he would have reviewed during operations against Indari's royal family. The widow watchmaker of Blackwater Bay, resolving into the legendary nightingale he had believed eliminated during his previous operation. "Well," he said finally, gun never wavering from Winslow's temple despite his attention focusing entirely on Celine. "This explains the unexpected resistance. I had wondered how a backwater port managed such coordinated countermeasures. Perhaps you simply overestimated your operational effectiveness," Celine suggested, her posture appearing relaxed, though every muscle maintained readiness for instantaneous response. Caney's laugh carried genuine amusement beneath its menacing surface. The famous nightingale, reduced to defending provincial shopkeepers. What remarkable diminishment from guarding royalty. "Did you find civilian obscurity satisfying after such glorious purpose?" "I found peace," Celine replied simply. "Something you interrupted tonight." His expression hardened, calculation replacing amusement as he assessed tactical options. The gun pressed more firmly against Winslow's head, emphasizing the harbormaster's vulnerability. "Peace is luxury purchased through power," Caney stated, business-like efficiency replacing philosophical musing. "Now, while I appreciate this dramatic reunion, I require the harbormaster's cooperation for matters that won't wait for reminiscence." "Release him," Celine countered, "and perhaps I'll permit your departure from Blackwater Bay without the permanent consequences your previous actions have earned." Their negotiation balanced on knife's edge, each recognizing the other's capabilities while calculating optimal resolution pathways. Winslow remained admirably composed, despite his position between predators, his weathered features betraying concern, but not panic, as he awaited outcome of this unexpected confrontation. The harbourmaster's next action demonstrated why Celine had assessed him as exceptional among Blackwater Bay's citizens from her first days in port. Without warning, Winslow suddenly slammed his head backward with surprising force, connecting solidly with Kane's midsection while simultaneously dropping from the chair to floor level. The maneuver created momentary disruption Celine had anticipated, but not expected. Opportunity she exploited with the lethal efficiency that had once made her legend in royal protection circles. She closed distance to Kane before his weapon could reacquire target, her movements expressing decades of specialized training distilled to perfect economy of motion. What followed would later be described by Winslow as like watching lightning strike with purpose. The refined widow watchmaker transformed entirely, her delicate hands moving with precision that rendered Kane's considerable combat training ineffectual. She redirected rather than blocked, avoided rather than opposed, her entire methodology expressing the fundamental principle that had made the Nightingale unique among protection specialists. Positioning rather than power-determining outcome. 17 seconds after Winslow's unexpected initiative, Sebastian Caney lay unconscious on the harbourmaster's office floor, disarmed and restrained, with materials that had begun the evening as decorative elements in Selene's carefully maintained hairstyle. The weapon that had threatened Blackwater Bay's future rested securely in her hand, its weight familiar despite years away from combat operations. Winslow stared at her from his position on the floor, processing the extraordinary transformation he had witnessed. "Mrs. Cattry," he managed finally, accepting her offered hand to regain his feet. "I believe you may have omitted certain details regarding your previous employment." "Watchmaking requires steady hands," she replied, with the faintest suggestion of a smile. Previous experience proved useful in developing necessary skills. The harbourmaster's expression suggested he recognized the deliberate understatement, but would respect her preference for discretion. "Any occupation requiring such remarkable talents must have been quite significant," he observed, studying Caney's unconscious form with professional assessment. "Though I imagine their loss proved considerable when you chose Blackwater Bay instead. Some losses precede such choices rather than follow them," Celine answered quietly, the rare personal acknowledgement indicating trust beyond what she had extended to anyone since arriving in port. Further conversation halted as shouting approached. From outside, civilian defense teams converging on the harbourmaster's office after securing other objectives throughout the harbour district. Celine assessed tactical positioning with automatic efficiency, calculating optimal extraction routes that would maintain operational security while ensuring Caney remained secured for appropriate authorities. "Your friends will require explanation regarding tonight's events," she noted, binding Caney more thoroughly with proper restraints located in the harbourmaster's security cabinet. "They'll receive precisely the details necessary for proper resolution," Winslow assured her, understanding perfectly her preference for discretion. "Though I suspect Blackwater Bay's newest legend may feature a mysterious defender appearing from the fog when most needed, then vanishing before proper thanks could be offered." Celine acknowledged this inevitable development with resigned acceptance. Community preservation had required more revelation than her security protocols would typically permit, yet Winslow's understanding suggested her identity might remain sufficiently protected despite tonight's necessary compromises. Legends rarely capture truth, she observed, completing Kane's restraints with professional thoroughness, though sometimes they preserve its essential nature while obscuring unnecessary details. As voices approached the office door, Selina moved toward the rear exit, pausing only briefly to address one final matter. Federal authorities should arrive by morning. Kaney's operation extends beyond Blackwater Bay. Their jurisdiction will prove necessary for complete resolution. "And you, Mrs. Cattry?" Winslow asked, genuine concern evident beneath professional courtesy. "Will tomorrow find Blackwater Bay's finest watchmaker at her shop as usual, or will certain revelations necessitate departure from our community?" Celine considered his question with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Operational security suggested relocation following tonight's exposure, yet the connections formed during 3 years in port represented attachment beyond previous experience. The Nightingale had always prioritized mission over personal consideration. The watchmaker had discovered value in community that complicated such clear delineation. "I believe," she answered finally, "that timepieces will require maintenance regardless of tonight's events. Craftsmanship presents its own obligations, not unlike protection, understanding passed between them, commitment expressed through professional understatement rather than emotional declaration." Winslow nodded once, acceptance and appreciation conveyed without unnecessary words that might compromise her position. "Should others overhear? Then I look forward to bringing my grandfather's pocket watch for its scheduled maintenance next week," he replied as footsteps reached the office door. "Some mechanisms require specialized attention available nowhere else in port." Celine acknowledged his loyalty with the slight nod that characterized her most genuine communications, then disappeared through the rear door as Blackwater Bay's defenders arrived to secure their community's future. Sebastian Caney would face justice through proper authorities, his operation dismantled through federal intervention rather than her direct action against every participant. The night fog swallowed her figure as she moved silently toward Merchant Street, where a modest watchmaker's shop awaited return of its proprietor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explanation, adaptation, perhaps reconsideration of certain security protocols. But tonight had confirmed what 3 years of peace had quietly suggested. The Nightingale had found her truest purpose, not in royal protection, but in defending a community that valued the watchmaker without requiring knowledge of the weapon she had once been. In Blackwater Bay, she had discovered something beyond duty or obligation, belonging that transcended both her previous life and her carefully constructed cover. As she approached her shop through fog-shrouded streets, now free from Blackwell's surveillance, Celine Cattry allowed herself the rarest of indulgences, genuine anticipation of tomorrow's return to craftsmanship, to community, to the life she had built, rather than merely adopted for tactical purposes. For the first time since leaving royal service, the Nightingale welcomed dawn, not as operational conclusion, but as continuation of something worth protecting. A simple watchmaker's existence made extraordinary through connection rather than combat. Dawn broke over Blackwater Bay with extraordinary clarity, burning away the previous night's fog as federal agents moved efficiently through streets still bearing evidence of confrontation. The Providence sat flanked by Coast Guard vessels, its concealed compartments for weapons transport now exposed. At the Harbour Hotel, officials coordinated an investigation that would dismantle Sebastian Kane's entire operation. Away from this activity, Celine Cattry stood alone in her watchmaker's shop. Last night's events had compromised her position beyond what her security protocols would typically permit. Professional assessment suggested immediate relocation, yet as morning light filtered through beveled glass windows, casting familiar patterns across her workbenches, Celine found herself hesitating. The bell above her door chimed, announcing Thomas Hargrove's arrival. The teenager entered with unusual hesitation, clutching his delivery satchel with white-knuckled intensity. "Mrs. Cattry," he began uncertainly. "Dad said I should check if you still needed today's deliveries after everything." Good morning, Thomas," Celine replied with composed courtesy, accepting the package of specialized gears. "These Czech-manufactured balance springs will resolve the regulation issues in Judge Parker's grandfather clock. Your timing is excellent. As always." The familiar exchange seemed to both comfort and confuse the boy. "They're saying you fought off 5 armed men at the registry office," he blurted finally, "and that you captured that shipping magnate single-handedly." "Rumors frequently improve with retelling," she observed, examining the delivered components. "Though I believe Mr. Peterson would describe events differently." "You don't have to explain," Thomas said quietly. "Dad says sometimes people have to be 2 different things. Says what matters is what you choose to be when you have the choice." The key. Observation touched Celine more deeply than anticipated. Simple acceptance without demands for explanation represented precisely the understanding she had feared impossible. "Your father is an insightful man," she acknowledged, allowing genuine appreciation to warm her typically reserved demeanor. "Perhaps you might observe proper testing procedures for these balance springs." As the morning progressed, customers arrived with their usual requirements: watches needing regulation, clocks requiring adjustment. Each interaction carried subtle differences, lingering glances, hesitant questions about her well-being. After last night's troubles, oblique references to her assistance to the community. Yet none demanded explanation. None expressed fear of her revealed capabilities. Instead, they brought their treasured timepieces with the same trust they had always shown. Shortly before noon, Martha Winters arrived bearing a basket of lamb stew and fresh bread. "Figured you might not have time for proper cooking after such eventful night," she announced, placing it firmly on Selene's desk. The gesture symbolized everything Selene had found in this port that differed from her previous existence. Royal service had provided purpose without personal connection, duty without integration, respect without belonging. "Thank you, Martha," she replied, genuine gratitude warming her words. Martha waved away her thanks. "Least anyone could do, considering." She paused, uncharacteristic hesitation suggesting something beyond casual conversation. "Unless recent events might necessitate changes to your situation here. I believe Judge Parker's anniversary clock still requires specialized attention before his celebration next week," Celine answered carefully. "Certain obligations persist, regardless of circumstantial developments." Martha's expression brightened, with visible relief. "Well then, I'll expect you for Sunday dinner as usual, roast duck this week." Afternoon brought Harbourmaster Winslow, his weathered features bearing new lines after the previous night's confrontation. "Federal authorities have requested your statement," he informed her, "though they've agreed my office provides suitable venue rather than their temporary headquarters." He continued with casual precision that belied the statement's importance. "I've explained certain aspects of your expertise as relating to previous security consulting experience in European ports, knowledge that proved valuable during criminal enterprise targeting harbour infrastructure." The fabricated explanation, close enough to truth for plausibility while distant enough for security, represented the perfect solution to her exposure dilemma. "That seems appropriate characterization," Celine acknowledged, gratitude expressed. Through understatement, Winslow studied her with his penetrating gaze before adding, "Blackwater Bay has benefited from many arrivals over the years, though few have contributed such distinctive value as our resident watchmaker." "The contributions flow both directions," she replied, offering rare personal truth. "Certain mechanisms function best when properly situated among complementary elements." As Sunset painted Blackwater Bay in amber and crimson. Jacob Turner entered her shop, his powerful frame bearing visible evidence of Blackwell's attack. Figured proper thanks were owed, the shipwright stated, placing a small wooden box on her counter with ceremonial deliberateness. Made this some years back, never found worthy recipient until now. The exquisite box featured an intricate carved nightingale on its lid. Details rendered with remarkable precision. Seemed fitting, he explained. Local stories already featuring nightingales appearing when most needed, then vanishing before proper recognition. The gift confirmed the inevitable mythology developing around her actions, transformed through community storytelling into legend that simultaneously revealed and concealed her true nature. Exceptional workmanship deserves appropriate utilization, Celine responded, though I suspect nightingales prefer practical appreciation over elaborate recognition. Community values contributions in forms they're offered, Turner agreed, without demanding nature be changed to suit observers' expectations. As night settled over Blackwater Bay, Celine's communication device activated with a familiar signal. Cover identity compromise confirmed. Relocation protocols standing by confirm implementation timeline. 3 years earlier, such directive would have received instant compliance. Tonight, Celine considered broader implications. Blackwater Bay had demonstrated capacity for discretion that transcended official protocols, offering protection that supplemented rather than replaced her own capabilities. Her response reflected this evolved understanding. Compromise contained through community integration. Extraction unnecessary. Operational status maintained with enhanced local assets. Timeline indefinite. From her workshop shelf, the carved nightingale box caught evening lamplight, transforming a practical gift into a symbolic representation of her evolved identity. No longer merely the widow watchmaker maintaining careful separation, nor the royal protector defined exclusively by lethal capability, but something integrated yet distinct, connected through choice rather than obligation. The nightingale had found her truest song, not in royal corridors, but in a modest port where craftsmanship married protection, where precision served both timepieces and community defense, where belonging transcended background without requiring erasure of capabilities that made her exceptional. Celine returned to her workbench where a judge's anniversary clock awaited proper calibration. Her hands moved with practiced precision, ensuring perfect timing for a mechanism that would mark celebration of commitment sustained through decades of partnership. The symbolism did not escape her. Connection sustained through mutual contribution. Precision enhancing rather than restricting function. Individual components working in concert toward unified purpose. Different terminology, but identical principles, whether applied to timepieces or communities. In Blackwater Bay, Selena Catri had discovered perfect balance between her exceptional capabilities and ordinary connections, her protective instincts, and creative craftsmanship. The nightingale would continue her vigil, but now from a workshop filled with ticking mechanisms that measured peaceful moments rather than security threats, surrounded by a community that valued both her timepieces and her protection. In such harmony, even the most complex mechanisms found perfect balance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.